The medieval era is always ripe for new games. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanks, 10 medieval games you need to play in 2019. And as a quick disclaimer, just to start this off, Elder Scrolls 6 and Ghost of Tsushima, these are games that are not coming out this year. We're not going to mention them. Don't get too angry at us. We're anticipating them and any information we can get on them as much as you are. Number 10 is Chronicles of Elyria. And let's just go ahead and say this is a doozy of an idea at very least. It's probably best categorized as an MMORPG. However, the developers have come up with a classification of multiplayer evolving online world, or MEOW. I'm not going to say that that's definitely going to catch on, but it does at least tell you what they're going for. The idea is there will be a player-run family that you can work your way up from a simple adventurer all the way to king. And that can involve running a dynasty as well, because your character ages and eventually dies, and more or less forces you to continue the story as other members of your family and or dynasty. Unfortunately, we don't have a massive amount of time to talk about it because in order to explain the game, there is a lot of stuff to cover. It brings a lot of survival mechanics to the MMORPG, it's classless, it encourages you to build a character as you see fit, and ultimately consider their impact on the world, because you'll be playing in the world that has been impacted by that character as another character once they die. It's a game that I think has a massive amount of potential, and I hope it lives up to it because honestly when it comes out, I'd like to be talking about it in much further depth. It looks cool as hell. Chronicles of Elyria is supposedly coming out sometime this year. We don't have a date yet. I have my fingers crossed though. This is one of those games where I think there's a lot of possibilities and I really look forward to seeing if it lives up to them. Number 9 is Valhalla. Now the basic premise is medieval battle royale. Now obviously with a name like that, it's Viking themed. You can play it in first or third person, and the game for the most part revolves around melee combat. From a realism perspective, it looks quite a bit more realistic in gameplay than a lot of other battle royale games because it's sticking in an area where, in theory, there's not a lot of mysticism. Now, the battle royale premise itself is where that changes a little bit. There is a quote-unquote gravity field forcing you towards the center of the map. There are 4 evenly sized sections with different seasons, weather, and lighting conditions. And obviously, that's not going to be the most realistic thing you've ever seen in your life. I don't think that really matters, though. It's kind of the combat that centers here. It's going to be a 50-person battle royale as opposed to the standard 100-person. And I think considering it's melee combat primarily, there are bows and arrows, but I don't think that's going to account for as much gameplay as melee combat is going to. It's in closed beta with a small amount of people who supported the game currently, and it looks pretty damn cool. It at least looks like something different, which is not normal in the battle royale space, of course. Valhalla will be hitting sometime this year. I think it's going to be pretty cool. Number 8 is Tabs, the totally accurate battle simulator, which is a game in which you have 2 factions battle it out with each other on various maps. Now that sounds like a very, well, normal concept, but the whole point of the game is that the physics are bad, everybody looks kinda dopey, and everything turns out very silly. It's more or less based on flailing bad physics, and they've put googly eyes on basically everyone. I think the funniest looking one in particular is the mammoth with the big goofy eyes. Like, you're not gonna get accurate battles in this game, and if you're expecting them, you're gonna be disappointed, but if you're expecting something that's silly and fun and dopey on purpose, you're not going to be disappointed. It's really good. It's out in early access now. I would give it a shot. It's only $15, and you'll get way more than $15 worth of enjoyment out of it. I already have. This is the type of game that I come back to all the time. It's just fun as hell. Number 7 is The Settlers, a sort of remake, reboot of the popular City Builder. A series that's been going strong since 1993. Since its inception, the series has been about building a city, a settlement that can self-sustain, it has a functioning economy, as well as also building up a military presence as to conquer other territories. Now, obviously, it looks significantly nicer than any previous iteration of the series, and it's pretty exciting to see. Honestly, the screenshots and video I've seen of the game are really, really good looking. There's a richness to it that I think it really benefits from, and I look forward to playing it. Number 6 is A Plague Tale: Innocence, which I think looks like a really cool action-adventure game that's sort of based on stealth. It's kind of, in some ways, I think a progression of some of the ideas we saw in The Last of Us. and it takes place during the first phase of the 100 Years' War and the Plague of the Black Death. So there's hordes of rats in this game. I can't imagine that it was like this in real life, and I can't imagine myself caring at all. The game hinges on scaring away and distracting these hordes of rats, as well as avoiding knights that are guarding towns. What we've seen of this game, in my opinion, looks like such interesting gameplay, basing a lot of the action in crafting and managing supplies, that I think it's going to be a stealth game that kind of really just manages to stand on its own. It's coming to Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One not long from now, on the 14th of this month, and I frankly think that it's going to be a good one. Number 5 is Total War 3 Kingdoms, which is, if you don't know what Total War is at this point, turn-based strategy, real-time tactics, etc., etc. It's perhaps some of the finest strategy games out there, and this takes on the Three Kingdoms, an era of Chinese history that we get two versions of in a lot of different media, and we get both versions here in Total War. For one, there's Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and for two, there is Record of the Three Kingdoms, both basically indicating the realism level of the story they're telling, but either will also have an additional idea that Total War really hasn't had in the past. You'll have various generals that actually interact and build relationships with each other, and that will have much more of a direct impact on your actual game than any quote-unquote characters in previous Total Wars have, which is pretty much zilch. I think this is cool on account it adds a dimension to the game of kind of story, and considering the era and the history around it, I think it's going to make for a much more interesting game. That's also coming out this month. It'll be hitting PC on the 23rd, and that's going to be one that everyone wants to look out for if they're a strategy fan. I think it's going to be phenomenal. Number 4 is Outward, an action RPG set in an open world with survival elements that you are not the chosen one in. Oh boy, does this game make sure you know you are not the chosen one. You're just a regular person out for an adventure. And guess what? You also have to deal with survival-oriented mechanics. So you get an infected wound, that's probably going to be worse for you than a monster. On top of that, the magic systems in the game I find particularly satisfying, in that spells are often very weak unless you cast them from inside a magic circle, which is itself another move to perform. It also requires a bunch of time for you to go get. It requires sacrifice in your health meter, and essentially if you continue to play the game and continue to accrue more magic, your character will actually physically be weaker. So get good at that magic if that's the route you want to take. That's something that I find to be particularly interesting, sort of a more zero-sum approach at character development over the course of the game. I'd like to see more of that in games. It works so well here. Also, the world is absolutely beautiful in this game. It's filled with color and actually works. It's not cheap, it's not sprawling with nothingness, it's filled with life. And truly, I find this game really enjoyable. I'm hoping to find more time to spend with it. It came out a couple of months ago, and sometimes it's hard to keep up, but it's a great game and I highly recommend it. Number 3 is Mordhau. It's a hack and slash game set in medieval times. It is, well, let's just call it brutal. This is a game that is paced not entirely Doom-like, but if you can imagine Doom with detailed sword fighting going just a tiny bit slower, that's basically this game. The sword fighting I really like. It's intuitive and actually gives you a lot of options as you take part in sieges, various land battles, and just any other excuse that you might find to behead some random. When you're riding a horse, it's particularly intense, but there's a lot of good detail and the game just plays like a joy. Mordhau has been out since April, and if you're looking for something very brutal and very fast-paced, you really need to look no further. This is the game to play. Number 2 is Darkborn, a game where you are the monster. Now, you're a small monster and you're being hunted by humans. And of course, this is alternate history. It's not real history. Not a whole lot of real monsters in real history. But the idea is you're being stalked as prey. You're a kind of enemy in someone else's game, which is an interesting concept to go with. Since it was originally announced as Project White, we've learned that the idea is basically to tell a story about a family ripped apart and about opposing powers in the world. I think it's a really interesting title, and I think if it pulls off what it's going for, asking the question, what has that monster been through, it could be extremely interesting, and so far it looks like it is. When it hits in whatever form later this year, I'll definitely be there. And finally, number 1 is Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. We've been talking about this game for a while. Now, Bannerlord functions as a prequel to Warband if you're into the Mount and Blade world. And to describe quickly what it is, you build a party of soldiers and perform quests. That's, so many games out there already too. They intend to adjust sieges in this game, make them more strategic, as well as make relationships between characters more complicated and more interesting. Previous entries in this series are really enjoyable, and I'd highly recommend trying any of them if any of this sounds interesting to you. It's entirely possible this game doesn't come out this year. We've been talking about this game since 2016. It's always just on the horizon, and I have a lot of hope that this year is the year because I like Mount and Blade. Apparently there's at least going to be a closed beta sometime not too long from now, but I don't know. We did see the game in playable form last year, but I don't know exactly what that means. We'll keep our eyes on Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord though. A few bonus games for you: Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Now, is this a full-on historically accurate game? No. It's a fantasy medieval game set in Japan, but there's a few other fantasy-oriented games we've already talked about. Sekiro is just a really good game. With its semi-rhythm-based combat, the world it plunks you into, the types of powers, the grappling hook, it's really just a fantastic game, and you owe it to yourself to play it if it sounds even vaguely okay. It is. It's so much better than that. The next game is Foundation, a city builder that is medieval and not built on a grid, which I'm going to go ahead and say, if you've ever seen a medieval town, I think this kind of approach makes more sense than a grid-based one. And finally, Kingdom Wars 2 Definitive Edition, a real-time strategy game set in, well, let's say medieval fantasy, specifically a dark fantasy with orcs, elves, dragons, that type of stuff. And it's a game where a lot can be going on at once. A battlefield can be quite sprawling. You'll be juggling, building, and attacking, and dealing with hordes of attackers. It's definitely something worth diving into. And that's it. Which medieval games this year are you intending to play, or have you already played? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like, and if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero, and we'll see you next time right here on GameRanks.